Peppa Pig, the toy that followed. It started on the playground. George was playing in the sand when he noticed something strange. Between the swings, under the slide, there was a toy. Old, broken. A small stuffed donkey with one ear torn off and empty eye sockets. It was dusty and a little muddy, but it looked like it had been waiting. "Look, Peppa," George picked it up. "He's sad." "Ew, he's dirty. Don't touch that," said Peppa. Someone probably threw it away. But George hugged the toy. "He's lonely." They played a little longer and then went home. George left the donkey on a bench. He didn't even look back. But that evening, when they returned home and went up to their room, the donkey was on his pillow. "George, did you bring it with you?" asked Peppa. "No, I didn't take him. I promise." Mummy Pig picked up the toy and put it in a bag to throw away. Daddy Pig took out the trash before bedtime. But in the morning, it was back on the floor, a little closer to the bed. "Maybe you took it out again, George," Mummy said, trying not to worry. "I didn't touch it," George whispered. "It came on its own." The next night, Peppa woke up to a creaking sound, very faint, like someone walking on the floor. She sat up in bed and saw it. The toy was sitting, no longer lying down, sitting, facing the beds. It looked different. One of its eyes had been replaced with a button. Its smile was slightly stretched, and there was a seam on its neck that hadn't been there before. Peppa walked to the dresser, planning to hide the donkey inside, but then noticed something strange. Footprints, tiny, dirty, leading from the door to their beds. She placed the donkey in a drawer, closed it, checked twice, then hid under the blanket. But in the morning, it was on George's pillow again. "Daddy, it's following us," Peppa cried. "It keeps showing up. It's alive." Daddy Pig took it out again, this time far away, to the bin by the road. He saw it himself. He threw it away. And yet, that very night, after the children fell asleep, the stuffed donkey was sitting in the corner of their room, quietly, head tilted, whispering. The words were impossible to make out, but its lips were moving. Now it stays, a little closer each day, a little louder each night, because it doesn't want to be abandoned. It's found a new friend, and it will never leave.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning when Peppa and George arrived at their playgroup. The classroom looked exactly as it always did, with purple tables, yellow chairs, and colorful learning posters. But something felt different today. The air seemed thicker, and the usual cheerful chatter was replaced by unsettling silence. Madame Gazelle was standing at the front of the classroom, but her smile seemed wider than usual, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her eyes appeared to be watching everyone at once, never blinking. When she spoke, her voice had a strange echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The children took their seats as they always did. Peppa sat next to Susie Sheep, while George clutched his dinosaur toy. But as the morning progressed, the toys around the classroom began to move on their own. A teddy bear's head turned slightly. A toy car rolled across a table. During story time, Madame Gazelle opened a book with completely blank pages. Yet she began reading from them as if they contained the most fascinating tale. Her voice grew deeper and more hypnotic with each word, and the children found themselves unable to look away from the empty pages. The classroom windows began to fog up from the inside. Strange shapes appeared in the condensation, handprints too small to belong to any of the children, and words written in an unknown language. The shapes would appear and disappear, always just at the edge of their vision. When it was time for outdoor play, the playground equipment had changed. The slide was now impossibly tall, stretching up into the cloudy sky. The swings moved back and forth on their own, creaking in a rhythm that sounded like a lullaby. The sandbox had turned into a perfect circle of black sand. Peppa and her friends stood at the edge of the playground, unsure whether to venture out. As they hesitated, they noticed that their shadows were moving independently of their bodies. The shadow children were playing different games, making different gestures. The sky above began to darken, though it was still mid-morning. Clouds gathered in unnatural formations, creating shapes that looked like enormous faces peering down at them. Inside the school building, they could hear footsteps in the empty corridors, slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the halls. Madame Gazelle appeared beside them without warning. Her smile was even wider now, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to come from multiple directions. She suggested they play a new game, close their eyes, and count to 100. The children agreed to play this strange game. They closed their eyes tightly and began to count together. But as they counted, they could hear the world around them changing. The sounds of the playground equipment grew louder and more distorted. When they reached 100 and opened their eyes, everything was exactly as it had always been. The slide was its normal height, the swings hung still, and the sandbox contained ordinary golden sand. But as they walked back toward the classroom, Peppa noticed something that made her stomach turn cold. In the sand beneath their feet, she could see footprints that led to places they had never actually walked, arranged in patterns that told the story of a morning that had somehow both happened and not happened at all.
Peppa Pig, the eye collector. It all started with a single button. It was just lying on the kitchen table, black, round, with 4 holes. Mummy Pig picked it up, turned it over in her hoof, and tossed it into the sewing drawer. "Strange," she mumbled. "I don't remember this one." The next day, there were 2, in the exact same place, identical, clean, perfectly smooth, as if freshly made. Mummy Pig put them away again, but couldn't recall where the first had come from. By the 3rd day, there were 4. Daddy Pig decided the children were playing a prank, but Peppa only shook her head. "We didn't touch them. They just appear." On the 4th day, the buttons weren't on the table. They were on the floor, next to Peppa's teddy. "George, look, he used to have eyes. Now they're buttons. Small, shiny, unevenly sewn, but tight." Peppa swore Teddy's eyes used to be glass, blue, cheerful. "Maybe he always looked like that," George said, uncertain. But when she looked in the mirror, she could swear Teddy was watching, following her, unblinking. By the 5th day, buttons were found in the playroom, near the bookshelf, and George's dinosaur, his eyes had changed too. Same black buttons, 4 little holes. "Daddy," Peppa whispered, "someone's replacing them. It's just coincidence," he said, waving it off. But that night, the house fell unnaturally silent. No wind, no drips, no breathing. And then Peppa heard scratching, software uneven, like claws dragging across wallpaper. She stepped into the hallway. On the wall, marks, long, thin, deep, and between them, a phrase carved into the plaster, "Now I see." In the morning, in the family photo frame, all the eyes were buttons, even hers. Only the real Peppa, not yet. "It's not us anymore," Mummy Pig whispered. "It's changing us." In the closet, they found a box of buttons, but they were too new. No packaging, as if someone had made them. Here, on the 7th night, Peppa saw a shadow. In her room, thin, elongated, a vague figure, faceless, shapeless, but with claws. And that same dry scratch. She hid beneath the blanket, but through the fabric she could feel the stare, warm, burning. When she opened her eyes, it was gone. But Teddy had a 3rd eye, right in the middle of his forehead. Daddy Pig no longer looked at Peppa. His eyes were flat, round, black, sewn in. Mummy Pig smiled wider each day, but never spoke again. George cried at night, but didn't know why. And Peppa now carries a mirror, small, round, checks her face every morning, whispers into the glass, "Still mine, still mine," because she knows one day she'll wake up and won't remember what her real eyes ever looked like.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a quiet evening at the Pig family house when Peppa noticed something strange about her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Instead of her usual cheerful smile, The reflection seemed to be frowning, and its eyes appeared darker than they should be. When Peppa waved her hand, the reflection moved a second too late, as if it was thinking about whether to copy her movements. George was playing with his dinosaur toys in the living room when he heard whispers coming from inside his toy box. The whispers were soft at first, like wind through leaves, but gradually became clearer. They were calling his name, but the voice didn't belong to anyone in his family. When he opened the toy box to investigate, all his toys had turned to face him, their plastic eyes somehow more alive than before. Mummy Pig was cooking dinner in the kitchen when she noticed that the vegetables she was cutting kept rearranging themselves when she wasn't looking. Carrots would roll into perfect circles, potatoes would stack themselves into tiny pyramids, and the onions seemed to be watching her with their layered rings that looked disturbingly like eyes. Daddy Pig was reading his newspaper in his favorite chair when the words on the page began to change. The headlines shifted from normal news to messages that seemed directed specifically at him. "Daddy Pig should look behind him," read one line. "The shadows are moving," warned another. When he finally turned around, he saw that his shadow on the wall was standing up while he remained seated. As night fell, the family gathered for dinner, but none of them mentioned the strange things they had experienced. They ate in unusual silence, each lost in their own unsettling thoughts. The grandfather clock in the hallway began chiming 13 times instead of the usual 12. And with each extra chime, the room seemed to grow a little darker. Peppa excused herself to go to bed early, but as she climbed the stairs, she could hear footsteps following her that didn't match her own rhythm. When she reached the top and looked back, there was no one there, but she could see wet footprints on the carpet that definitely weren't hers. In her bedroom, Peppa's toys had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around her bed. Her teddy bear sat in the center, and for the first time, she noticed that its button eyes seemed to be looking directly at her. When she tried to move the toys back to their usual places, they felt heavier than normal, as if they were resisting her efforts. George's room was even stranger. His dinosaur toys had formed what looked like a prehistoric hunting formation, all facing toward his bed. The toy dinosaurs' mouths were open in silent roars, and their tiny plastic teeth seemed sharper than he remembered. When he tried to play with them, they wouldn't move from their positions. Downstairs, Mummy and Daddy Pig were cleaning up after dinner when they realized that the dishes were washing themselves. Plates floated gently in the soapy water, scrubbing themselves clean, while cups and saucers arranged themselves neatly in the cupboards without any human help. The house itself seemed to be changing. Doors that were usually easy to open now required extra effort, as if something on the other side was gently pushing back. Windows that had been closed were found open, letting in a cold breeze that carried whispers in a language none of them recognized. As the family finally settled into bed, they each lay awake listening to the sounds of the house. Creaking floorboards suggested someone was walking around, but when they checked, the hallways were empty. The walls seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting ever so slightly, as if the house itself had come alive. In the morning, everything returned to normal, but the family never spoke about that strange night. They went about their usual routines, but each of them occasionally glanced at mirrors a little longer, listened to their toys a little more carefully, and paid closer attention to the shadows that danced around their cheerful, colorful world.
Peppa Pig, the numbers. Peppa woke up early. George was still sleeping, gently snoring. She walked down to the kitchen, and then she saw it. Right in front of the door, on the floor, there was a white chalk number. 1. Neat, perfectly written. Peppa frowned. "George, did you do this?" she asked later. George only shrugged. "Dinosaur can't write." Daddy Pig wiped it away with a cloth. "Probably just some silly game," he said. The next morning, a new number, 2nd, same place. Again, neatly drawn in white chalk. This time, Mummy Pig seemed more puzzled. "That's strange. The door was locked all night. Who could have done this?" They erased the number, tried to forget, until the 3rd morning. 3. Now it was in the living room, closer to the stairs. Daddy Pig grew irritated. "If this is a prank, it's getting old." 4th, in the hallway. 5. On the stairs. The numbers were moving closer to Peppa's bedroom, one every night, always a little nearer. On the 6th day, Peppa woke in a cold sweat. Something felt wrong. She looked down. 6 was marked on the floor beside her bed, and next to it, a black smudge, like a hoofprint, but too large. The edges were cracked and jagged. Peppa showed it to her parents. Daddy Pig said nothing. Mummy Pig just cleaned everything and threw the chalk away. But it wasn't the chalk that mattered. That night, Peppa didn't sleep. She sat under her blanket and listened. Outside her room, a soft scraping sound, as if something was dragging across the floor. She clutched George. He slept peacefully, like nothing was wrong. In the morning, there was a new marking. On the wall, high up, almost near the ceiling, the number 7, and beneath it, scratched in jagged letters, "You're next." Her parents told her she was imagining things. "Try to relax, Peppa," said Daddy Pig. "It's just your imagination." But that night, it all got worse. She woke up and realized someone was standing by the door, a figure, tall, a shadow, barely visible. Peppa held her breath. It didn't move, but she heard whispers right in her ears, though it had no mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Silence. Then, one step forward, into the room. Peppa pressed herself into the pillow. She wanted to scream, but couldn't. The air was thick, like trying to breathe in syrup. When she opened her eyes again, it was morning. No numbers, no shadow, but on the bathroom mirror, the number 8, and next to it, her hoofprint, only larger, and beneath it, "You're the last."
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a quiet evening when Peppa discovered something strange in her bedroom. The toys on her shelf had moved during the night, arranged in a perfect circle around her bed. George noticed it too. His dinosaur collection was facing the same direction, all staring at the door with their plastic eyes. Mummy Pig dismissed their concerns with her usual smile, but there was something different about her expression. Her eyes seemed to linger on empty spaces, as if she could see something the children couldn't. Daddy Pig was reading his newspaper, but the pages never turned, and his glasses reflected images that weren't in the room. The next morning at playgroup, their friends were acting strangely. Susie Sheep spoke in whispers about dreams where children walked in circles around the playground at midnight. Pedro Pony mentioned seeing Madame Gazelle standing motionless in the classroom after dark, her eyes wide open, never blinking. During snack time, the juice boxes tasted metallic and cold. When Peppa looked at her apple, she could swear she saw tiny faces pressed against the skin from inside, their mouths moving silently. The playground equipment began to move on its own, swings swayed without wind. The seesaw tilted with no one on it. As the day progressed, Peppa realized everyone was repeating the same conversations from yesterday. Word for word, gesture for gesture, as if following an invisible script. When she tried to point this out to George, he just smiled and said exactly what he had said before, at exactly the same time. The shadows began to move independently of their owners. Peppa watched in horror as her own shadow waved at her from the wall, its movements completely separate from her own. The shadow children played different games than the real children, their dark forms dancing in patterns that hurt to look at. When Mummy Pig arrived to collect them, something was wrong with her car. The windows were tinted so dark that nothing could be seen inside, and the radio played a children's song backwards, the melody twisted into something unrecognizable yet familiar. At dinner, the food kept changing when no one was looking. The kitchen clock ticked backwards, and the pictures on the wall showed the family in poses they had never made, in places they had never been. That night, Peppa heard footsteps in the hallway that stopped outside her door. The doorknob turned slowly, but when the door opened, no one was there. Just the hallway stretching longer than it should, with doors that led to rooms that didn't exist. George appeared walking backwards, his eyes closed, speaking in a voice that wasn't his own about the place where lost episodes go. The house began to shift around them. Rooms rearranged themselves, Stairs led to different floors, and windows showed impossible views. The family photos began to move, showing the same scenes over and over, but each time slightly different, slightly wrong. As the night deepened, Peppa realized they might not be in their real house anymore, but in some other version where the rules were different and nothing was as it should be.